Well, here in Stillwater, they're in the process of completely renovating the herb garden and making it a lot larger than it used to be. And today I thought we'd talk about some of the a bit more unusual plants that they're putting in. And right here, we have this beautiful bed that's been planted very recently, and it's already mulched. It's got the pea gravel down, which is a great mulch for herbs because it helps keep the soil kind of warm. It doesn't trap in quite as much moisture. And they've planted several plantings here of Cuban oregano. Now, this is Cuban oregano, and if you compare it, I brought an actual oregano plant that you usually see to cook with. This is an Oregonium here, and has that classic, we think of it as an Italian food smell, but it's actually used in several different types of food. And if you smell this Cuban oregano, it smells very similar. Depending on how you grow it, if it's got a little bit more sun or maybe a little bit more fertilizer, it might have a little bit different scent to it. But if you compare the plants, if we look at them, you notice that the leaves of the oregano that we usually think about are very thin, while the leaves of the Cuban oregano are actually very thick and fleshy. And they're also very fuzzy. And this plant is actually a tropical plant, which that means that it is not going to overwinter for us, even though it is a perennial plant. It's tropical, and we do not live in a tropical environment as much as we think so this summer. But it really doesn't like temperatures below 40 degrees. So where you can leave this oregano in the ground all winter, you're going to need to take this oregano and take it inside. The neat thing about that is it's actually more closely related to a common houseplant that we have, a Plectranthus, also coleus. So it lends itself very well to taking cuttings and bringing inside. And while we have it planted out in full sun here in the herb garden, it actually can take a bit lower light levels, so it does very well in the window over the winter. And you see, you can just take a cutting, just have your top whorl. If you took this cutting, you would take about 3 inches off, remove all of these leaves down here. I'm just going to go ahead and break them off like that. You'd cut that and then just stick that down in some moist soil. It will root very quickly and you'll have this all winter. And the other thing about it is that while this works well in dishes that you would use common oregano in, it doesn't lend itself that well to drying because of the thick fleshy leaves. You may run into it molding before you get it dried. So it works a little bit better if you use it fresh. And the other thing is you would want to experiment with it and not just sub it out completely for, say your recipe called for a teaspoon of oregano. You may not want to use a teaspoon of this right away. You might want to just kind of experiment with it. It tends to have, if you put too much in, more of a turpentine flavor to it. So while it does work well, it smells wonderful. It's wonderful for a scented garden. It's not a one-to-one substitution. Now we've got another more unusual herb here. And again, this is a tropical, so we've got it planted out here for the summer. However, if you wanted to plant it in your garden, you might even think about planting it in a pot. This is lemongrass, and it does have that beautiful lemony smell. And you don't smell it so much when you rub the leaf, but if you break the leaf and smell it, you get that, oh, this is great lemony smell. Now this plant, again, likes full sun. It needs to be planted in a well-drained area. And where we didn't really, I don't know if I mentioned it, but the Cuban oregano, we didn't want to fertilize it very much. This plant really likes fertilizer. And so if you put some composted manure in with it when you plant it, it will love you. And also if you come along every couple of weeks or so, give it a little bit of liquid fertilizer, it will also do a lot better because it's a heavy feeder, it's a grass, and it's growing a lot. So it actually likes to have fertilizer. Now, when you go to harvest the lemongrass, the part that you actually use, while you can cut off the leaves and infuse those to make a lemony tasting water or broth. The part that you actually use, and we're going to move over here and take a look, is the base of the lemongrass. And the way you know it's ready to harvest, really, if you look here at the bases of the stems, they're kind of small, but look over here and we've got one that's approaching about 1/2 inch. And that's about where you would want to harvest it. And when you go to harvest it, you're going to want to cut it down. If you follow the stem down, it gets kind of bulbous down here. And you just want to cut it right below that bulbous part. You know, kind of like a green onion. It gets a little bigger at the bottom. You're going to cut it right there. Here we go. And I even got some of the roots here. So you're going to cut that. And also, this is a good way to take it in. Remember, I said it's tropical. It's not going to make it through the winter here. You could take a piece like this, put it in a glass of water. It will root, and then you can keep that inside for the winter. But when you go to use this, if we're going to cook with it instead of just root it, you just remove these outer leaves here till you get down, kind of see. That's kind of like a green onion too, where you remove the outer leaves. And then the part that you're going to use to cook with is this piece right in here that's white. And you can use that in different dishes. I know Thai cooking uses lemongrass a lot, and that's very good. When you bring it in for the winter, whether you bring it in a pot, which you can do, put it in a sunny window. This one might take up a little bit too much room. While it likes water, well drained, but don't let it dry out during the summer, you actually want to keep it no fertilizer and not much water over the winter. And you're going to cut, if you bring it in and even if you root it, you're going to cut your leaves down so you don't have all this extra, and kind of bring it in like this, either in a pot or rooting or whatever, over the winter, and you almost kind of ignore it, and it will do a lot better. If you overwater it over the winter, it's probably going to rot on you. Now, the last plant that we're going to talk about is kind of a variation on basil. Well, it is a variation on basil. This is variegated basil, and that's what's fun about having a whole lot of room in your herb garden, is you can start branching out and planting more unusual plants that you can use, you know, for decoration as well as in your cooking. But I just wanted to show you here the difference. This is just your standard sweet basil, and this is the variegated basil, which actually variegation is a technical term for the way the plant fails to have any chlorophyll in its cells, and so it ends up being white, sometimes yellow, and sometimes it'll be different colors because it has other cells that mask the green. But this one actually just lacks chlorophyll. So you notice one thing right away that happens with variegated plants. The leaves tend to be smaller than a plant that has all of its chlorophyll because it doesn't manufacture as much food for the plant. So they tend to be a little bit more stunted. The nice thing about this variegated basil, while you can use it to cook with and all, you know how regular basil, it's an annual, you know, it isn't a perennial. It isn't going to come back every year, and it wouldn't here anyway because it's, again, it likes a warmer temperature. But the other thing about it is once basil starts to set flower and then seed, you notice how it basically starts to die because it's done its job. It's an annual, it's set its seed, it's going to let the seed disperse. There's no reason for the plant to stick around, so it starts to die. That's why when you have regular basil, you want to keep the blooms off so you can keep getting your basil leaves all summer. Well, with the variegated basil, it really doesn't bloom. So you don't have that problem with it wanting to go dormant on you when you forget to harvest. So that's actually kind of nice. And while it doesn't have maybe as much basil flavor as your workhorse here, your sweet basil, it does lend a nice addition to basil dishes that you might have. And again, you could bring it in over the winter, bring a cutting in, put it in the windowsill, and have a little bit to use when you don't have it all growing out in your garden. So anyway, these are just a few of the more unusual herb plants that they're able to add because they've expanded the herb garden here so much.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.